Welcome to Bone, Stone, and Obsidian, a Dark Sun podcast.
I'm your co-host Jesse.
And I'm your co-host Robert.
Tonight we have legendary Dark Sun artist Tom Baxa. Welcome, Tom.
Wow, thank you. Legendary. I like that.
Hey, I think that's underselling it. You are my favorite artist, so I'm
Oh,
very excited to have you here.
cool.
So we're going to talk about some news first, and then we will get to chat with Tom. So first, Athas.org news. The Crimson Sphere, a Dark Sun Spelljammer crossover, was recently released on Athas.org. And that's pretty timely because, Spelljammer was just released for 5th edition. So those guys did a lot of work to get it out quickly, and it's pretty cool if you check it out.
Yeah, there's also some new articles on Athas.org. One's part two of a short in-character write-up of a Rule-Thon life shaper named Zontosu. And of course, we have another Athasian survey project. This one's about Trade Nest in the village of Ral. The Athasian survey project goes all over Athas to see different parts of the world. So it's great inspiration if you're a DM or if you're making a new Dark Sun character and you're thinking, maybe I want to be from somewhere unconventional, not one of the city states.
Yeah, it's been a great project. Jack originally did those in the Facebook group, and he kind of expanded them to put on the web. Also, recently I ran a poll on the Arena, which is the Athas.org
Forums.
forums. Thank you. About what kind of time period most DMs usually set their Dark Sun games in. The options were like free year 0 before Kalak died, free year 1 after Kalak dies, free year 11 after the Pentad, free year 311, which was Paizo's timeline, and then something else. And not surprisingly, 59% of people chose free year 0 before Kalak died, followed by 19% chose free year 11, 15% chose free year 1, and then 7% said something else. So that's, not surprising, but interesting.
Yeah. Obviously, people really like the classic setting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Along with this, the Adventures Under the Dark Sun blog over on a different part of the web released a new monster, the Aloe Lacerta. It's part reptile, part plant. I guess so your sun balm can walk beside you. Um,
Yeah.
Man, that is some real lizardy agave hooch, I think.
Yeah. Chris Moneymaker, a Darkson fan, interviewed Jack Meyer from the Pristine Tower Development Group, as well as Luke Swadling about their kind of contributions to the Dark Sun fan communities. You can find those links on his YouTube channel, which of course we will post in the show notes.
And there's some new actual plays this month. Dune Gangs and Dust Devils actual play podcast with DM Josh Delvillar, aka Athasian Runner, on Twitter, who of course is a huge Dark Sun fan, like many of us, and runs a great game, so that's worth checking out.
Definitely. And episode 35 of the Lawful Stupid second edition Dark Sun game run by Mark Hope, longtime Dark Sun fan, they are now headed to the road the road to Valley of Dust and Fire. So
That's
they're just
serious business, as anyone who
yeah,
knows Dark Sun
and
understands. So,
they're just going on and on, like every week they're on, which is awesome.
right.
Mark runs an awesome game.
Danger zone.
All right, let's get to Tom Baxa. So, Tom, welcome once again. I'm super excited to have you on. Um, so, how did you get started doing art for D&D?
Well, I did go to college and get a degree in illustration. I went to Northern Illinois University and I studied under a professional comic artist, Mark Nelson. And he's still a professional illustrator. He's worked on a lot of Dungeons and Dragons stuff. And so I got a degree and was sending my stuff out to art directors trying to find work. And right before I got out of school, I got my first piece published in Dragon magazine. So that was really cool. And
Mm-hmm.
once I got out of school, I started just freelancing, and I was interested in comics and fantasy art. And I started with Dragon magazine, and it took a little while. I kept sending my samples in the mail. We did it in the mail in the old days, people. And I would send them to the art director on the Dungeons and Dragons side. There was different art directors for the magazine and the games.
Mm,
So it took a little while, but then I finally did get a call and did some work for them. So that was really cool. And I think I probably talked to them at Gen Con as well. It's always a good idea to talk to art directors and show them your work in person and just kind of, uh, you know, let them get to know you a little bit. It helps you get a job.
definitely. So how long after you kind of started um, doing work for D&D did you get involved with Dark Sun? I mean, you were there from the beginning, but how long was it after you'd started from D&D?
Well, oh man, it's hard. It's hard to say. I graduated in college in 1988, and it was probably about 2 or 3 years before I got into D&D and was doing work for them. So yeah, I was right almost in the beginning of Dark Sun. So whatever year that released,
Yeah, released
we
in 91.
thank you. Okay, 91. Yeah. So yeah, it was. Uh,
So just a couple years after you started.
yeah, just a couple years. Wow, that's interesting. I thought it was longer than that. Yeah, I was freelancing for them and doing working on various game books and stuff and modules. And then they they started. I think Tim Brown and Troy Denning had created the game and brought Brom on board to do some covers and did some of the black and white stuff, kind of the initial concept stuff and illustrations that went in the original box set. And shortly after that, they brought me on and asked me to kind of be the full time artist on Dark Sun, the interior artist.
Hmm. Yeah. So you can you tell us kind of about that? So like, did you have sort of any did you work with Brahm at all, or were you guys kind of separate?
Well, Brahm and some of the other cover artists all were on staff at TSR, and they worked on site in Geneva, Wisconsin, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. I was a freelancer, so I worked from home. I was
Oh,
living in
okay.
the suburbs of Chicago, which was about 2.5 hours away from Lake Geneva. And Mark Nelson and I were both freelancing and stuff, and he also lived in the Chicago suburbs area in Illinois. And so when we finished a job doing some freelance stuff, we would drive up and go to lunch with the artists because we knew all those guys. You know,
Hmm.
we got to know them at Gen Con and through TSR. So we would come up and see everybody and hang out. So when Brom came on, was hired on. He was kind of like one of the new guys, and we just got to know each other um, through that kind of interaction, just socially. And of course, we were always looking at each other's work and stuff like that. So that was fun. I don't think Brahm probably didn't have any much to do with the decision making on who they brought on as an interior artist.
Hmm.
He might have had some input. I don't know. Um, but it's usually the art directors that decide that kind of stuff. And since, the writers, were really the creators of the world setting, I suspect they, at the very least, the art director probably said, here's a couple of guys we like for this. Who do you want to bring on?
Hmm.
Or which one do you think fits the style and things like that. But it's funny because I never really I never really asked those guys. Um, it was all kind of just a whirlwind and interesting to be brought on to be like the full-time artist on a campaign setting for a while, and so that was kind of just really exciting for me.
So how did that work? Did they like just ask you straight out, or were they like, could you draw these couple things and then we'll take a look at them, or like how did that work exactly?
I think they'd seen enough of my work to kind of know what I could do. So I didn't really have to do like a tryout,
Hmm.
um, which is not unusual. That's a very good question because sometimes, you know, and it happens in comics very often, like, oh, we could see you could uh, draw Superman, but can you draw Spider-Man?
Right.
Even though you're a talented artist, sometimes they'd like to see what you do on their specific IP. But
Uh-huh.
there was nothing like that. I'm trying to remember. I think I came in for kind of a meeting, and I met Troy and Tim probably for the first time. I might have met Tim around the office in the past, but we all sat down and they showed me. They talked about Dark Sun a little bit and showed me the art that Brom had done
Hmm.
up until that point, just to kind of give me a sense of the flavor of the game and things. So
Yeah,
there
that's
So
what
was, sorry,
sorry, go ahead.
there wasn't much of a tryout, but there was some conversations around it. Um, and I really don't think I did. I don't think any did any illustrations until the very first product I worked on.
did the art directors give you some like reference pieces and say, this is what we're thinking these sorts of creatures and places look like? Or did they give you a lot of leeway to just go with your own vision for things?
Yeah, they did give me a lot of leeway. I definitely was springboarding off of what Brahm was creating, and he kind of set the initial tone. And certainly, whenever one of his new cover paintings came out or was ready for the next module, I would take all that in and try and use that as a cue as to what the buildings looked like, some of his costume ideas and things like that. But I was really generating so much more art than Brahm. Uh, maybe I don't know, 20, 25 illustrations a product, if not more.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So there was so much more to be drawn, and I had an opportunity to kind of invent a lot more and add to the setting. Um, but I played off of what he was doing because he was kind of setting the tone. And then I was making sure I was kind of following in with that, and then trying to add to it and spice it up and add some dynamic stuff and interesting costumes and things like that.
Yeah, Brahm was basically doing the pinup posters of Athos, but you were going, here's what everyday life on the streets is like. Here's what it's like in the desert. Here's what the different sorcerer kings are like and what the Veiled Alliance is like. All these different touchstones of the setting. That was all yours.
Yeah, yeah. I I get a description from the art director that so all the fiction and the writing for the game module is created before I am privy to any of that kind of stuff. So the writers are responsible for all that creation, and then I brought the visual side to it to kind of enhance what they were already creating. So it's always kind of a team effort, but it started with those guys, and I imagine it started even before that with Troy and his novels, inspiring
Hmm.
the game designers and game writers.
Definitely. When I look at the original Dark Sun box set, it looks like in the regular books in the Wanderer's Journal and the Dark Sun rulebook, it looks like maybe you have like about a quarter of those pieces of art. But really, I think where I when I think about Baxa and Dark Sun, I always think about the adventures and the players cards adventures, because I think there's
Hmm.
probably more Dark Sun art than really any other setting because of those players cards. There's like, I don't know, what is there, let's see, 40 or 50 pages
Right,
in
because
each adventure.
in the flip books, the original
Hmm.
adventures, when they decided to use a different format instead of
Yeah.
just being a 8.5 by 11 soft cover, but instead it was the wire bound, spiral bound flip book. Every page had an illustration, so you were just cranking them out.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it was a lot of work to get those done in, I don't know, I had like a month and a half.
Oof.
Uh,
Oh
yeah.
man. I think I could feel the cramps in your drawing hand from here.
No, it was so much fun, and really neat to be on a cool IP like that. Uh, I had a ball creating stuff for Dark Sun. It really fit my wheelhouse, and um, and there were so many interesting ideas coming forth from the writers and the setting. It was a lot of fun.
And it's just all over. 10 box sets and supplements. Um, man, Robert's compiled a list here. Ivory Triangle box set, City by the Silt Sea box set, Dragon King's hardcover, The Will and the Way, Gladiator's Handbook, City State of Tyr, Earth, Air, Fire and Water, Slave Tribes, Terrors of the Desert, Dark Sun, Monstrous Compendium 2, Terrors Beyond Tyr, and you're credited in Veiled Alliance, but it looks like it was Mark Nelson. Was there a story behind that?
Uh, I don't know. Do you? Uh, I mean,
Robert,
the
do you
Mark.
have more info on that?
the only more only information I have is that Guthay, somebody on Twitter, had apparently emailed you about it, and you said it wasn't you, and that you thought it was Mark Nelson. Then they emailed Mark, and Mark said, "Yeah, it was him." But I never heard anything more about that, so I didn't know if you had ever heard anything about that, like what
Hmm.
happened there, how you got credited.
Well,
Eh,
he must have sent me an image, and I could tell who did the art, and
Uh
I
huh.
knew it wasn't mine.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what product it was for, but Mark didn't do a ton of darks. He might have done, one or two illos, and it might have even been for Dragon Magazine or something.
mm,
I don't know if that was just a misprint, miscredit, or what happened there.
well, we'll go down as a gaming mystery.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, you like you said, you were the kind of staff artist for it, so I think probably they just put your name on that because it was on everything else.
yeah,
Right.
could
It's
be.
like, oh, who's the Dark Sun artist? That's Baxa. Okay, put it in the credit.
There was a time when I wasn't the artist anymore,
Hmm.
but yeah, for a straight run, I was the guy.
Yeah,
Uh,
Veiled Alliance, and Veiled Alliance was like one of the earlier ones, so it's kind of strange that you didn't have anything in that book.
did I
Yeah,
not?
I don't know.
No, yeah, no, I don't think you had anything.
All
As
right.
I
All
open
right,
there,
I'm settling this. I'm getting out my copy of Veiled Alliance and
I
I'm
was
Yeah,
just
checking
looking
please
at it
do.
earlier
right
today
now.
too.
Please
So
do.
um,
Interesting.
While Jesse is looking at that, people love your Thri-kreen art. And did you know that one of the Dark Sun Kreen species is actually named after you?
No.
So we interviewed Tim Beach on this show, and Tim did Thri-kreen of Athas, which is one of the books that you didn't have any art in, which I thought was surprising because your Thri-kreen are awesome and people really love him. And so he said that he named each of the species of Thri-kreen kind of after the artist who drew them in that style. So yours was the Toxa, which kind of sounds like Baxa.
Mm.
Like the other major, so that was one of the major species in the kind of main part of the game. And then the other major species he called Gerald after Gerald Brom because it was kind of his style. And then there
Oh,
were like three others from around D&D that had drawn Thri-kreen.
that is really cool. I didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
kind of
yeah.
fun.
So, I gotta ask in conjunction with that, your envisioning of the Thri-kreen is different from how they appeared in first edition D&D, where they were much more upright. They still had, the very insectoid features and the extra arms and the additional abdomen thorax assembly and whatnot, but they were bipedal creatures the way they appear in modern D&D settings as well. But in the Dark Sun stuff, your Thri-kreen are much more like a mantis or a grasshopper or a locust sort of thing. Was this your decision or an art direction, or what made you go that way?
Yeah, I think I had a lot of freedom, and I did do pencils, and I think those had to get approved before I inked them. So I just went to town. I just I wanted to play more with bug shapes and a large thorax and abdomen and stuff, and just really kind of play with that. So I just started designing them a little differently, and the art directors probably saw the pencils and thought it was cool and approved them. So that was cool because I really like what I did with those, and I loved drawing them all the time. Uh, so that was, yeah, that was fun to be able to kind of expand on what had been done before and just really make them really wicked and spiky.
That's fantastic. I
Nice.
love that they are so inhumanoid, that the Dark Sun setting really revels in these characters that are so far abroad from the usual human and human-like characters of other D&D games.
Yeah, right on.
Oh, and I did finish flipping through Veiled Alliance, and every single interior illustration is not you, it's someone else. It's the same artist because they're all done in the same style. It's a little more rounded than your style, but it's clearly inspired by your work. So someone was taking notes on what you did and then was told basically, we need you to illustrate this book. I don't know, maybe you had a vacation or a sick day, or maybe they had scheduled too many products early on. But
Yeah.
they told someone, do this, but do copy what Bax is doing.
Well,
Okay.
didn't you say, Tom, that you learned from Nelson?
Yeah, yeah. Mark Nelson was a professor at Northern Illinois University for
Huh.
quite a while, 20, 30 years. And he actually mentored and trained several artists that are still working in the fantasy industry. Um, R.K. Post
Oh,
and,
nice.
yeah, Jim Nelson, Jeff Lobenstein,
Okay, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
um, Mike Sutphin, who worked on Magic and some D&D stuff, I think, and there's others. So yeah, it's really cool. And he does it. He still does it. He
Hmm,
just
hmm.
had some Magic card ink drawings in the
Hmm.
I think it was the Baldur's Gate Magic set. It's a D&D crossover set.
So
Nice.
it's entirely plausible that he's doing his particular style, but then he looked at reference, because there's a lot of material in Dark Sun that is not Eurocentric in its motifs. That's, draws inspiration from Africa or Mesoamerica or India and Cambodia and things like that. And there's a bunch of those elements in these things, and I think that you put a lot of that into the stuff that you did. Brom tended to do more, gladiators who are oiled up and flexing their quads was his motif. But you went really far abroad with the inspiration of these stylings, some of which comes from the writing, and some of which I'm going to guess just came from your own artistic designs.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I would just kind of pull from visuals I would see. I didn't remember doing a tremendous amount of visual research per se.
Mhm.
It, it was a great opportunity for me to just kind of come up with stuff in my imagination and play with that. Many other IPs are much more restrictive, or you have to follow what has come before and things like that. So uh, it was kind of fun to just you know keep playing off of what I had done previously, what Brom was doing, and just kind of build off of that. But yes, I certainly was looking at other kind of desert lifestyle uh, peoples of the world and things like that, Adobe type building structures. And so, yeah, I was definitely pulling in from some, I guess you would say maybe more less traditional sources. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, much more cosmopolitan in its inspiration than a lot of early D&D, which was pretty heavily inspired by, this is Western Europe circa 12th to 15th century.
Hmm.
You so were any of the monsters that you did things that you drew first, and then someone went, "This looks great. Let's make a monster out of it," or was it all like they gave you descriptions and said, "Okay, here's the art direction for all these monsters that we want you to do"?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get that question often. That that first scenario laid out does not happen very often at all. We wish it did a little bit more. Sometimes there's collaborations, you know, with an artist to create stuff first, and then the writers will write it. You know, the stats and things like that. It might have happened on occasion, like maybe I had a creature in a background, or like a Thrycreen was supposed to be fighting some monster, and I came up with a monster, and they might have then wrote it into the game. But that really doesn't happen all that often for an illustrator for hire. Again, the writers and the game designers are coming up with a lot of that stuff before I
Hmm.
even hear about it. And then the art director then usually pairs it down for us artists. Instead of saying, hey, read this whole adventure and pull some scenes, they have decided which scenes they'd like to do, and give us a little description. Sometimes it's really, pretty wide open, like, we need kind of a desert worm that, is 20 feet tall and is spiky. And then I could just make it up totally what he looks like. So that's always the most fun, and sometimes it gets a little more restrictive, or you need to draw one of the female barbarians that Brom had on this cover,
Hmm.
in
Mhm.
an environment that is mostly Adobe brick setting, and like that. There might be more description, uh, but in that case, then I still get to create the composition, and create the drama and the action, and make it dramatic and fun, and exciting. So that's what I always try and bring to an illustration, or creepy, or uh,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, scary, especially with the monsters. I want them to be threatening, and creepy for sure.
Yeah, your illos are generally not, here's just a guy standing around. They're always telling some kind of a story, whether it's the story of, some people haggling in the market square while some shady business is happening in the background, or of someone crawling their way across the desert trying to find any water that they can to survive. There's always some underlying action that's happening in there.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I try and bring some of that element in, and some of it was already in the writing, and they needed that illustrated. I mean, that's what an illustrator does. They bring the story to life with some visuals, and try and add to it too.
So you also did work on, the main kind of products, but also you did 9 adventures. One of which you did the cover for Forest Maker. Um, kind of like we were talking about before. You did the flip books. Probably 50 or 60 pieces for each one. Anything else you can kind of remember about any of those adventures?
Well, no.
Do you remember? How about? Do you remember the cover of Forest Maker that you did of the Evangian, the big sort of like butterfly looking thing?
Yeah, totally. That was really exciting. That was the only painting that cover painting I got to do. I did do another cover painting that was first put on a Ralph Partha miniature set. It was like
Oh,
Yeah,
the
the
the, the
the
guys in the
chariot.
chariot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I did that painting for Rel Partha,
Hmm.
and then I think they used it maybe on an interior.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of exciting, because I at the time I was almost exclusively doing black and white pen and ink drawings and stuff. So for me to start getting a little bit of cover work was really exciting, and
Mhm.
especially when I got a chance to do a Dark Sun cover, I was thrilled.
That
So,
that became the picture of the Ivory Triangle book inside the Ivory Triangle box set.
oh,
Okay.
okay, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So Forest Maker, yeah, that was cool. Brahm had already designed those creatures that had that kind of evolutionary track to them,
Mm-hmm.
just like the dragons. or they're not the dragons, right?
No, they were sort of like the opposite. Like they were the ones that they came from the preservers, so they're quote unquote the good guys.
Right, right, yeah. But they also had an evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's that whole transformation theme where the wizards are channeling magic and psychic energy that's so potent that they're turning into these post-human entities, and the bad guys turn into dragons, and the good guys turn into the Evangians, which are these semi-insectoid angelic beings.
yeah, yeah. So when I got to look at those, I thought, oh man, that would be really cool to illustrate. It could be that they wanted that on the cover. I suspect they did, and I got to do pretty far into the transformation stage,
Hmm.
and he's glowing with light and just this beautiful being, and there's a couple of adventurers characters in the foreground just kind of in awe and being surprised by the appearance of yeah, that character. So that was fun.
Yeah.
So you talked about the chariot piece. Did you ever see the miniatures that were made from that?
I don't I think I got a copy of the box, but I never opened it up actually
Oh,
because I
they're
wanted.
awesome. They're great looking miniatures.
You know,
Oh,
if you
good.
have an unopened copy of that box, that's worth some nickels nowadays.
Oh, is
Yeah,
that right?
yeah, definitely
Yeah, I still have all my Dark Sun, you know, modules and box sets.
awesome.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So you also talked about a custom commission you did of a Thrycreen with a huge sword over on your blog. Was there other custom work that you would consider Dark Sun or Dark Sun adjacent that our fans might want to know about?
No, I didn't get a heck of a lot of that kind of thing. Yeah, I did a pencil drawing for yeah, a guy who played Dark Sun and loved it, and yeah, it was a Thrycreen. That was cool. How could I say no to that? That was so much fun. But no, I really didn't get a lot of. I didn't do a lot of commissions at the time. Actually, most of my career was as a working illustrator, and I was usually taking as many jobs as I could just to kind of keep the bills paid. And commissions weren't a big part of my art career. They still kind of aren't. I've done some over time, but not a heck of a
Mhm.
lot. Um, but the Dark Sun universe is just great. The thing that I loved the most was the full color monstrous compendium that I did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That
yeah.
was
There's a lot of great pieces in that for sure.
oh, thanks. Yeah, that was kind of a stepping stone in my career with my artwork, actually, because I did so many color pieces for that,
Hmm.
and I was kind of experimenting with a new approach where I would kind of do an ink drawing and then paint over it with acrylics and kind of tone down the line work a little bit, but let it still be there. So it was kind of a mix between drawing and painting, and that really was a great moment for me working on that stuff. And it was all Dark Sun, so it was some of the creatures that I had already created earlier, and I
Hmm.
got to do a color version, and then there were a bunch of new ones in there too. So that was, I mean, anytime I could do a bunch of monsters like that, that's golden.
Yeah, that Thrycreen piece that you did. The Thrycreen is holding this gigantic sword with two of his hands, and so that was inspiration for me. I had a character in a Dark Sun game that's playing a Thrycreen fighter, and I can't remember how it came about. I think it was actually something random. Like they were like all of a sudden they wanted to go do this weird thing, so I was like okay, and so I just kind of made this stuff up on the fly, and then they found this magic sword, and so I said it was a three-handed sword, and so the
Yes.
Thrycreen got it, and so obviously Thrycreen's the only one that can use it because he's got four arms. So that was pretty cool.
I love
So
that.
thanks for that.
Yeah, sure, that's really cool.
So I wanted to know also that the description of Athos as a place varies depending on the piece of fiction in question, not just because it's sometimes the city, sometimes the desert, sometimes it's the last sea of Saragar or whatever. But as an example, it's described in one place as having an olive-colored sky, but in some of the art, it's blue skied. In your artistic mind's eye, what does Athos look like? What do you see when you imagine Athos?
Well, I always kind of thought of it as kind of like the atmosphere being thick with dust
Hmm.
or soot or silt. Kind of like if there was a fire, and there's a lot of uh, debris, fine debris in the air. I always thought of it as kind of like that, although I imagine there's plenty of times where there were clearer skies, of course, but
Hmm.
that's what I thought of it as. And I always thought of the idea that the wind was always blowing around the dunes and kicking up sand and dust. Um, so I used to, I always kind of had dust flying around, if I remember right, in some illustrations and stuff.
Hmm.
But again, I'm mostly following what they're laying out. If they, in the writing, they were drawing attention to some kind of atmospheric feeling, then I would follow that.
Gotcha.
So we have a few questions from the Dark Sun group on
Oh, cool,
Facebook.
great.
Luke Swadling asked, we kind of went over this, but if there's anything else you can add, go for it. He said, "Are there any details you can recall about the art direction given for your Dark Sun work? Like, is there? It's such an iconic style now, but there really wasn't a lot in terms of visual reference beforehand. So how did that work out?"
Well, I think they gave me a lot of freedom. To their credit, um, the art director on Dark Sun. I'm trying to remember if it was Peggy. I can't remember. There might have been a couple, but I think I worked mostly with Peggy Cooper, and she was wonderful. I mean, she knew that if you let an artist kind of go to town and uh, play in their imagination a little bit and leave them alone, they're going to come up with some great stuff. Uh, but as part of my approach to being an illustrator, I do try and stay true to what's happening. And like I said, I would always kind of follow Brahms' lead. And if he created a creature, I would follow that and things like that. So it was kind of I kind of do my due diligence to try and stay true to the universe and things like that. But it was seldom that they it was really great to work on that on Dark Sun because they did leave me alone to kind of create a lot of neat stuff based on the fiction and the game fiction that was coming to me from through the art directors.
So when you're making that sort of amazingly different and distinct stuff, Frederick Leclerc asked that there were other character types and races and creatures that didn't look like anything in the core D&D book. And were there plans for even more variety of these sorts of characters and creatures, or was it just a sort of a freestyling and going, yeah, in this illustration, I'm just gonna make someone who looks like he's part lizard?
I think it came mostly from the fiction. Um, the it's funny sometimes. I also worked on a lot of the monstrous compendiums. If you remember the ones
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
were the three ring binders and
Yeah.
all those monsters and stuff, and Mark Nelson and I would work on those together sometimes, and we would split up the creatures and sometimes you would get an art description that said, we need a demon with a chicken head and one horn coming out of the side and the body of a dragon with goat legs. And it was just kind of a mashup that really wasn't all that interesting, but it was kind of what someone might have come up with. And then we had to try and make it fun. Um, so a lot of that uh, would come from the writers, or they don't want to give you too much description too, so they might say, we want this kind of to be a saurin lizard type race. They're a little hunched over, they have bent legs, but they're bipedal. So I often get a prompt like that, and then I could just make it start designing. So let's say if it was kind of a lizard race, I could decide what types of lizards I would look at and want to incorporate. Would I give them, big fins on their back, or would they have webbed hands or more claws, or so I was always making those kind of decisions for the most part. uh, I sure hope some of the writers and game designers, if they're listening or if you've talked to them, maybe they can give you a little more insight. I certainly, uh, mainly because of it's been a while. I'm having I don't want to discount anybody else's contribution, because we all were bringing a lot to it.
Awesome. So Jorge Bobadilla asks, were there any kind of like movies or books that inspired your Dark Sun art, or was it pretty much just from the art descriptions?
Oh wow, boy, it's often the case that all of that kind of stuff, and for me, I was not a super avid reader. So, I hadn't read Token and I hadn't read Dune or anything like that. I was more into movies and comic books. So, all that kind of stuff from pop culture always feeds in to, you know, some of the visual stuff and costumes and things I was coming up with. And still to this day, that's kind of the way I feed the well of information that I draw from, and a lot of it's subconscious too.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but so for Dark Sun, I wouldn't say there was much that I specifically was looking at. I would look at stuff from nature, and like I said before, like civilizations that lived in the desert, and how they built some of their structures. But I was playing it pretty fast and loose. I always find it fun to I'll bring a certain level of believability to something, so it feels like it could exist, but then springboard off of that and make it fantastical and a little wacky. So I usually didn't draw real tight from life. So I didn't reference things a heck of a lot unless I really felt the need.
Hmm. Intriguing. Well, that speaks well of your creative imagination. So, Christopher Justin Moneymaker wanted to know how much time TSR gave you on a typical illustration, since there were a couple of years there where you were churning out hundreds of illustrations a year. And he also wanted us to let you know that he thinks that your black and white Thri-kreen illustrations were awesome and by far the best Thri-kreen ever drawn.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for that. I appreciate that. I think I had like probably a month and a half or so to do an entire project. So if it was a box set, whatever was in there, or if it was an adventure module, however many illustrations were in there. Uh, so I would do the pencils first and do all the illustrations. Well, of course, I would read the art description first. And if I had any questions or something didn't make sense, I would check in with my art director and or Well, the art directors were usually the go-betweens, and then they would go to the game designers and writers and try and get me clarification. And then I would start doing pencil drawings, which pretty much ended up being uh, the straight up pencils that I would then ink. I work pretty directly that way. Some people, some artists do more thumbnails and flesh out things. I usually start with the page and just I think for a few minutes and come up with a composition that I like, or maybe I'll draw a character on the side a little bit, like, oh yeah, I want this guy to be kind of dinosaur like and crawling on all fours, and then I'll pencil the illustration, and then we turn those in for approval, and then I ink them. So usually the inking phase goes a little quicker because everything's already there, mostly.
Hmm.
So that ends up moving along a little quicker at the end. I'm sure there were times where I was sweating the deadline because, it was a lot of work, and I don't know how, you know, doing them in full color. If I had to do them all in full color, it would never happen. I mean, that's why I think very often nowadays, most books have many artists in them.
Mhm.
Um, they would really have to have, they're on a production cycle, so they got to get the book to the printer and get it out. So they don't want to spend 4 months waiting for one artist to do all these color illustrations or something. So, but back in the day, the black and white stuff went a little quicker. Uh, but it was always hell when I would get like, the bizarre scene. And I was just like, oh man, and you got to put in all these characters and all this stuff going on. And they were fun, but, you're just, I'm like, give me the monsters.
Nice.
Nice. So, Geekgasm, a page asks, the costuming of your characters, they were often having a combination of bright colors and animal prints, strange masks, and ornate headgear. It kind of gave them an otherworldly fear or feel. Like, where did those ideas come from?
Well, I think, just playing around with different shapes. And the cool thing about Dark Sun that I loved was there was such a scarcity of material that the inhabitants of the world always had to scavenge to
Hmm.
create armor and clothing and things like that. So I always kept that in mind, so there would always be pieces of, a thick hide, like from some kind of rhino or dinosaur, used as armor, and then leather straps to hold that together, and, different pieces of cloth. And uh, I forget, there was no metal, right? Or metal
Right.
was really
Very
scarce.
rare.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, everything was, made of stone blades, and they were held together with, sinew and leather strapping and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that was just a lot of fun to play with. Um, Helmets and masks create a lot of mystery, and, can allude to secrets and hidden agendas, and stuff like that. So on the bad guys, it would be fun to do that kind of stuff. Um, Headdresses and helmets and masks always feel kind of ritualistic and
Hmm.
a little more tribal, a little more primitive. So it was always kind of fun to mix that kind of stuff in. I mean, these are kind of the things that an illustrator will think about, or world creators. It's just, how do we get across, what's happening in the environment, and why a character might be wearing a helmet that obscures most of their face, as opposed to a helmet that's wide open and might have uh, like wings on it or something. That might be
Hmm.
more of a good guy. You would have wings or a plume or things like that. Um, so it's just fun to kind of play with those ideas and bring that element to the characters. I love doing the Templars because I always
Hmm.
was trying to push their costuming uh, into kind of a little darker feel and almost like cleric flavor, a religious kind of tone to it. So
There's
those guys were always fun.
there's a great piece you did again in Ivory Triangle for the city of Nibene that shows a procession of a bunch of Nibonese Templars all wearing ceremonial garb that
Mm.
is just great inspiration because the each piece is a little bit different. Like they're not all wearing the same uniform, so to speak,
Hmm.
um, but they are also very clearly drawing from inspiration that's fits more with Nibene's sort of um, Cambodian or uh, mid Asiatic influences. Um, And similarly, there's a bit in an adventure where you have a group of Nibonese Templars that are ambushing the characters, and you did a full page spread in black and white of these four warrior women, and their garb is also different. There's one in the foreground who's got like this leopard print, and then she's got a cloak over it, and part of the cloak is cloth, and then the other lapel of the cloak is some sort of scaled hide. And then there's one in the back that's got like wood or bone armor, and then one that has this ancient engraved metal breastplate and these striped shorts. And it's really a standout sort of style because it's showing how everyone is, like you were saying, a scavenger, and so there's no uniformity. It's not like there's a particular style and everyone's wearing this style, or this is the popular material that everyone uses. It's you take what you can get, and you
Yeah,
throw that together.
yeah. No, that's cool. And you said something just briefly that reminded me what's so neat for me as an artist is that I got to imagine this stuff and put it down, but th- one of the key reasons it was being done was to inspire you guys as players.
Hmm.
So whenever someone comes up to me at a con or something and tells me how much they enjoyed my stuff, and it just like you did, Robert, you saw something that sparked your imagination and you put it in an adventure for
Hmm.
your players, and I mean that is really wonderful and just fills me up. For my art and the writers and all our ideas to um, be cool in a way that inspires you guys to build off of it and continue to build off of it and play it and enjoy it all these years. That's just fantastic.
I'm gonna take that and run with it for just a second before we continue on our list of questions. There's a choice that you made in a bunch of the city pieces that I don't know how deliberate and intentional of a choice it was, but it always spoke to me. And it seems like a simple thing, which is you've got illustrations that show nobles and merchant princes and high-ranking Templars and sorcerer monarchs, as well as adventurers and gladiators and whatnot. Um, but these people might have cloaks or long robes and things like that, but nobody's got hems. All got really ragged edges, and it really said to me like, you're going to wear this piece of clothing until it falls apart. Even if you're rich, rich people can't even afford really elaborate clothing or even clothing that looks new, because
Yeah.
the things that you have you're going to use until they fall to pieces, because that's what this world is like, even for the people who have wealth and power.
Hmm.
And I felt that that really like laid down a strong impression of what the resource scarcity was like. It's so intense that everyone feels it at all levels of society.
That's awesome. Yeah. that's again, that's concept design and storytelling through visuals, and it's cool that you picked up on that, or brought your thoughts to it.
Hmm.
It's something that might be seemingly minor, but it could carry a lot of story. That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. Well,
And I've got one more Dark Sun question before we head off as well. As I look through your illustrations, when we get to City by the Silt Sea, which is one of the last books that you worked on, or products that you worked on for Dark Sun, and the art in there. Well, let's go back. So your original art is much more like heavier line kind of drawing, and the art in City by the Silt Sea is there's a lot more shading and less kind of just lines. Um, do you know like why you had that difference, or was it just a evolution of your art style, or what? Or did you have more time for those pieces?
Yeah, I think part of it was the evolution of my art style. I was playing around a little bit more with ink wash and watercolor, black and white watercolor. And it might have been advances in technology as well. Black and white line drawings are shot with a stat camera, or were shot with a stat camera, which basically saw very sharply in black and white. Uh, so you couldn't, it was difficult to do gradations and tones and things like that. It was a much more expensive process to reproduce that in books.
Ah.
And then once, the PC uh, got to be in everybody's home, and the advances there made interior art a lot easier. It was easier to do more color art, and definitely more tonal stuff. And I think that might have been part of it. I can't remember if there was a real distinct, technology moment where, like, hey, we could do more tonal stuff now.
Hmm.
But it was also part of something I was playing around with my art as well. It's just moving more towards more tones, and more towards adding some painterly elements, or paint
Hmm.
on top of just line drawing. Mhm.
Definitely. Awesome.
so beyond Dark Sun, you've worked on a whole bunch of other role-playing games like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness, Torg, Shadowrun, Earth Dawn, GURPS. You got any cool stories to tell from those?
Wow, you just named a bunch of stuff that I didn't remember I worked on at all.
Well, there's a name I've not heard in a long time, a long, long
Exactly.
time.
Exactly. Uh, well, as a freelancer, you pretty much were, you had to be hungry and just keep trying to find work out there, because it was seldom. I mean, before I was on Dark Sun, and even then, I was probably still freelancing on some other stuff a little bit. But Dark Sun, I knew every month I was guaranteed I was getting work, and and I could focus on it. That was fantastic. But part of the fun too, as a freelancer, is you could try out all kinds of different stuff. So if I saw something in the marketplace that I thought was kind of fun, and I'm like, wow, that's a cool setting, and it's got robots, and mixed with fantasy, I'd like to work on that. And so I would try. I'd show my work to the art directors, and try some different stuff, or maybe they'd seen me or met me at a show, and things like that. So I've worked on all kinds of stuff. Um, some of my all-time favorite work was for FASA. I actually was on staff with them for a couple years. I worked from home, so it still felt like I was freelancing, but I was a staff artist, and I did a ton of work for them. And that was an amazing period because the art director there, Jim Nelson, from Northern Illinois University, he was a little older than me, but and Jeff Lobenstein worked there too. And those guys were artists, so they knew what it's like to, you know, be a working artist. So they gave me a lot of freedom, and their universes, Shadowrun, especially Shadowrun, and then their fantasy world, Earth Dawn,
Hmm.
which I imagine a lot of the Dark Sun players also enjoyed because that was a really rich and interesting fantasy setting. Uh, but working on Shadowrun was so cool because there were cybernetics and psionics and robots, and then fantasy elements and dragons and magic. So it just had all kinds of great stuff to just bash together and come up with
Hmm.
cool stuff. So that was a lot of fun for me. Yeah, and again, I mean, I got to work on, I think, the card game for Vampire.
Oh.
Sometimes it was just a little bit here and there, a couple of cards. But I worked on a whole bunch of different stuff. And then, of course, Magic the Gathering, I was able to get in on in the mid 90s was the first set I worked on, and worked real steady with them for a while, and just kind of recently, the last couple of years, I've been doing more for them. Got back in and have a bunch of new cards and stuff, so that's been really exciting.
Yeah, that was actually the next sort of question is like, do you think that sort of these days, is that what you're most well known for, the Magic the Gathering work?
Yeah, I would say so. Um, a lot of it has to do with the strength of the IP, and you have Dungeons and Dragons, which is huge, and you have Magic the Gathering, which is huge. And what Magic was so strong at was building their worldwide tournament system that got the players involved, and they continued to play from their local game stores into the tournament system, and eventually there's a world champion every year, and that spread things globally in an interesting way. And I think it felt like they had a really strong uh, global reach and a large fan base. So then that, of course, you have the rabid community that of players that are totally into it, and that trickles down to the artists because the art is a very big part, obviously, of collectible card games.
Yeah.
And D&D is quite large too. Uh, and I think nowadays probably has more reach than it did maybe in the Dark Sun days. But they were, obviously distributing into other countries and things like that. So in my early days, I think Dark Sun and was kind of like a real hallmark for me, and a lot of it resonated with a lot of players, and they remember me for it more than anything else I did for D&D probably. The Monsters Compendiums I did enough of that I was known as a monster guy
Hmm.
for D&D for a while, but it's Dark Sun, which is just awesome. And then I think also the work I being at FASA FASA for a little while and having a steady run of art in there also, I think, helped me stick in some people's mind. But definitely Magic, and it's still going. I'm still doing art for Magic.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, as well as on your Patreon, which we'll link in the show notes. What kind of content do you put out there?
Well, for my Patreon, and actually in more recent years, I've been doing less illustration work and trying to focus on some of my own projects and ideas and things like that, and grow them and make art for them and things like that. So that's what the Patreon's about. At least now, is much more of my personal work, and the main focus is around a novel that I'm writing called Zombie Coven,
Hmm.
and it's a full-on fiction novel. and I'm working on the fiction still, and I've been making art uh, for that. It's gonna, it's gonna be filled with art. It's not a graphic novel, but it's gonna have lots of art throughout of the characters and some of the key scenes and things like that. So
Right.
that's been a lot of fun, and the patrons get the first look at all that stuff, and they get some neat rewards that has that art on it. So yeah, lots of fun.
And you sell some prints of your work at baxaart.com. Are there any Dark Sun pieces up there?
No, there isn't. I was just talking to my girlfriend about that. I don't know why that never really happened. Well, certainly uh, with any IP, and very often as an illustrator, we're doing work for hire.
Hmm.
And it's a certain type of contract, which means, we're being hired to make the illustration, but the company owns the rights to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that I cannot reproduce anything I did for Dark Sun to make a profit on
Mm-hmm.
it, to sell it. So I, like the Forest Maker cover, I can't make a print and sell those.
Uh-huh.
I could make something that's Dark Sun inspired, or it's got the same kind of flavor,
Right.
things like that. And I don't know. I guess I never really did do much of that. Um, it was kind of neat. I'm sure you guys know that I did some work for Tim Brown's kind of
Yeah, Dragon Kings.
Dragon Kings.
Yeah.
Yeah, his kind of reinvigoration, and I forget how he phrases it.
Sort of a reimagining and a reboot.
Yeah, yeah, kind
Spiritual
of.
successor, I think is what he
Yeah.
says. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, so that was kind of just fantastic to do some pieces for that.
Yeah, there are several really fantastic pieces that can fit Dark Sun as well, as evidenced by not literally. I think within the last week on the Dark Sun Discord, someone was asking like, "Oh, where did this cool picture come from of Dark Sun? I've never seen it." And it was the Cricus piece you did for
Oh,
for Dragon Kings.
awesome.
And
Yeah.
so like I told the story, and that I was part of that and linked to it and everything, and uh, I was like, that's definitely usable in Dark Sun.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. I'm curious, you guys who are players of Dark Sun, do you play Dragon Kings? Are they compatible? Do you mix and match them?
So there is definitely a lot of stuff that you could mix and match. I don't think it really got a really big following, a huge following. I mean, like I've got everything that came out for it, and it gets brought up now and again, so people are playing it. I
Hmm.
also know that Tim is working on a system. So originally when that came out, it was sort of like just a setting. It was systemless,
Yeah.
and then we did a few different like short PDF releases in various systems so that people could play it. But what he's working at now at his Strange Owl, what is it? Strange Owl Games, I think.
Mhm.
He is doing like its own system for Dragon Kings, and they're gonna write a new book for it.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Great.
I haven't used Dragon Kings directly in my Dark Sun, largely because the last time I ran Dark Sun, there's just so much content already that I didn't feel the need to pull additional stuff, and I was using it as an introduction to some people who were new. So I wanted to keep it to like, okay, here's stuff that was in the published material, but it definitely has like so many thematic similarities that you could pull inspiration from it. It could be very easy to hybridize certain pieces of it. There are other parts that are very different, of course, um, but you know, I think there was a specific set of inspirations to both Dragon Kings and Dark Sun that share some DNA, that mean that the two can cross pollinate effectively.
Yeah, I
for
could
sure.
see that. Yeah, cool.
So every once in a while, people kind of post pictures of original art that they bought, that is, from wherever, eBay or wherever they get it. And I've seen several pieces of yours. Do you have any original art pieces of Dark Sun left, or did people snap those up?
I have some uh, that I that really I loved and wanted to hold on to. I did sell almost all my Dungeons and Dragons art uh, years ago and in more recent years. So I don't have a lot, but I do have some pieces that I just really love. I think I have one or two of the Gith black and
Hmm.
white drawings, and
Yeah.
I have some pieces from the Color Monsters Compendium, and
Mm.
uh, yeah, and that holds true for all the stuff I've worked on. I've had some Fossa art that I just love, and a few Magic cards that I'll probably never sell, even though I could probably get several $1,000s for them.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, you make so much art, and some of it you just love, and some of it you're happy to let go to somebody who's excited about it and wants to put it in their house, and or keep it handy when they're campaigning, and just have inspiration from. So I love. I'm so honored when people are excited about my art enough to buy it and want to put it on their wall, or are inspired by it. That's just wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have some stuff here that uh, probably will never see the light of day because I love it.
That's awesome.
Is there
So
other work that you haven't mentioned or that we haven't mentioned that you recall that with some fondness?
Well, I'm always creating new stuff, and sometimes some of the type of art that really has a special place in my heart is something where I was kind of pushing my boundaries or experimenting a little
Mhm.
bit. So
Yeah.
let's say yeah, uh, I'll just paint a skull with the colors that were left on my palette from the last Magic card I painted, and it's kind of gummy and a little half dried, and I'll use a really stiff brush and a palette knife and come up, even though I'm painting something fairly simple, I might uh, come up with some imagery with the approach that really was cool for me. Um, I do like to try and n- not only with the characters and the visual, uh, styling of the characters and monster designs and things. I also like to try and bring in some elements of the paint itself, and um, the movement or the stroke I put down. So sometimes working with really thick paint, I could get some really neat stuff. Things will blend in an unexpected way and get a really cool effect, or allude to something a little more scary in the tactileness of the actual physical paint. So that kind of stuff is really cool and gets me jazzed. Um, People can look at my website under the dark art section and see more of my personal work there, and get a sense of what I'm talking about, and see where I'm experimenting a little bit and pushing things. Sometimes when you're doing an illustration for hire, you have to be able to convey what's necessary for the game. So I might paint a little tighter and make sure getting the idea across. And when I'm doing personal work, I could just spatter and do some things that I wouldn't normally do in an illustration, and it could really speak to me and whoever's looking at it in a different way.
that's fantastic. We'll definitely link to that stuff as well.
Yeah.
I think that's about going to do it for us, Tom. Thank you so much for coming on. It was really a pleasure to talk with you.
It's been
Yeah,
absolutely fantastic.
this was so much fun. Long time coming. I'm like,
Yeah,
I can't believe I've never been on your podcast
I
before.
know. Like, it was not too long ago. I was like, oh my gosh, I know Tom. Why is he not on the podcast? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm happy to come back again and answer more questions and things, and it's just a lot of fun, and I'm glad people are still excited about Dark Sun and want to hear about it. Uh, I have to say, I wish I had more, really intriguing stories around it. But uh, when you're in the middle of it, sometimes you don't realize, how special something can be. Uh,
Hmm.
I'm having a good time doing the illustrations, but I'm also going, man, I got to get these 25 things done in a month, and so it's always this mix. But then when I hear from guys like you who've been playing for a long time and really enjoy it, and that's just really special for me. And in fact, I was just at a Magic event, and I had somebody come up to me and say they used to play Dark Sun and they remember my work from there, and that just is really fantastic and makes me feel good. And I'm glad that I was able to contribute to this universe that people enjoy so much.
Well, thanks again, Tom. We can find you at your Patreon, your baxaart.com. Is there anywhere else that people can find you online?
Yeah, certainly. BaxaArt.com is my main hub, and you could always start there and find everything else. But in general, uh, I usually use at BaxaArt. So it's Twitter/BaxaArt, Facebook.com/BaxaArt. So that's same thing, Patreon.com/BaxaArt. That's how people can find me.
Fantastic. Thanks. And Jesse, where can we find you online?
I'm still on Twitter, Jesse Heinig at Twitter, although who knows how long that will last.
Yeah.
And you can see me on Facebook, and every once in a while I'll pop in at the arena on athas.org as well. And what about you, Robert? Where do we find you?
Same on Twitter. I'm at Radu76 for, as you said, as long as that lasts. You can find me on the Discord, on the Dark Sun Discord, the Dark Sun Facebook group, the arena. I also joined Mastodon on that. I'm Radu at tabletop.social. I joined Hive. I'm Radu on that. So yeah, I'm around. But that's going to do it for tonight's show. Thanks again, Tom. Thank you, Jesse. This was episode 26 of Bone, Stone, and Obsidian with Tom Baxa. Thanks a lot.